Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Aubrey had the same thoughts as Gina. But what else can we do now? The former asked with a frown. From the photos it was clear that Lucian was very intimate with Roxanne. Gina pondered for a while before saying, "We have to proceed with your marriage before they completely reconcile." Aubrey's face darkened further. She obviously knew that, but she didn't know how to achieve that goal. Gina's words were of no help to her. Oblivious to what Aubrey was thinking, Gina continued racking her brain. After a while, the latter spoke again. "No matter what, we can't let them continue meeting like this. You have to stay beside Lucian so that he has no chance to meet that woman." "I do want to do that, but Lucian has been ignoring me recently. I can't even get close to him. How will I replace that wretched woman?" Aubrey complained while sniffling. Gina glanced at Aubrey. "Who says you can't meet him just because he's ignoring you? How about you move into his house? That way he'll be forced to spend time with you all the time even if he doesn't want to see you. By then, all you need is some tricks to make him get over that woman." Aubrey was still hesitant. "A move into his house? Will he let that happen? Even before that woman returned to the country, he forbade me from sleeping over at his house, not to mention now. So there's no way he'll let me move in there." Hearing that, Gina frowned. For a moment, the mother and daughter sat in silence with troubled expressions. "If he won't let you do that, we'll think of a way to make him agree," Gina uttered coldly after some time. Seeing how confident her mother was, Aubrey was perplexed. Gina threw her a glance and took her phone, ordering, "Come with me." Afterward, she walked out of the room without waiting for Aubrey's reaction. The latter hesitated for a while before standing up and following Gina to the study. Samuel was working inside when he suddenly heard a few knocks on the door. "Come in," he said. Soon, his wife and daughter entered the room. At the sight of their sullen faces, Samuel frowned and put down the documents in his hand. "What's wrong?" Not knowing what her mother was up to, Aubrey stood behind Gina dejectedly. As for Gina, she placed the phone before Samuel. "Take a look for yourself." Samuel threw her a dubious look. Then he lowered his head and checked the phone. Just like Gina, he put on a grim face when he saw the photos. Why is this woman still with Lucian? He looked up at Aubrey, feeling sorry for what she was going through. Aubrey remained silent with red-rimmed eyes. "If we want her gone from his side, we have to come together and put on an act. As long as we get Aubrey to move into Lucian's house, it will be over for Roxanne," Gina claimed seriously. Aubrey and Samuel were both puzzled at her words. "Put on an act? How?" A cold glint flashed across Gina's eyes as she waved the two of them over. With that, they huddled together and listened to Gina's plan. That same night, Sonia was preparing to go to bed when Gina called her. Right after she picked up the call, she heard Gina sniffling from the other end of the line and Samuel's shouts in the background. "Gina, what's wrong? Did you argue with Samuel?" Sonia asked out of concern. Gina looked at the father-daughter duo who was acting at the side. Then she took a deep breath and choked out, "Samuel is angry at Aubrey. I think you should hurry and come over. Aubrey won't listen to any of us right now, but maybe you can get through to her." Sonia frowned and listened carefully. Indeed, she could hear Aubrey's sobs in the background. Because of the car accident before, Sonia was very considerate toward Aubrey. Upon hearing the latter crying, she felt her heart clench. "Calm down and talk to me properly. What happened? What made them so worked up?" "It's all because of..." Gina stopped her sentence midway as if she was reluctant to speak. She then sighed loudly and continued, "You should just come over." Anxious, Sonia questioned, "Why are you keeping things from me?" Aubrey will become my daughter-in-law sooner or later. You can tell me everything. Gina paused for a few seconds before saying bitterly it's because of her engagement with Lucian. Samuel thinks that Aubrey should just cancel the engagement and let Lucian go since he doesn't seem to like her, but Aubrey won't listen. She even claimed that she'd marry no one else but Lucian. That's how they started arguing. Gina's story sounded so convincing that it made Sonia feel apologetic. In the end, Lucian was at fault here. Not only did he make Aubrey wait for so many years, but he also left her hanging and disregarded her feelings for him. After finding out that Aubrey even had a disagreement with Samuel because of this matter, Sonia was more determined to give her fair treatment. Aubrey is right. I also object to canceling the engagement. She has waited for Lucian for so many years. Of course he has to take responsibility for her. Gina, calm them down first. I'll ask Lucian to go there. If all else fails, Aubrey can stay in our house for a couple of days so she and her father can cool off. Right after Sonia said that, she heard the muffled sound of something falling to the ground on the other end. Her heart instantly sank and she couldn't help but worry for Aubrey. It seemed like Gina was also surprised. It was only after a moment of silence that she answered, I'll try. After hanging up the phone, Sonia called Lucian immediately. At the Farwell residence, Lucian had just tucked Estella in and walked out of her room when his phone rang. Upon seeing the caller ID and recalling how Sonia had recently been so insistent about him marrying Aubrey, he rubbed his temples. He only answered the phone after a few more rings. Right away, Sonia's voice sounded in his ears. Aubrey had an argument with her father. I'm not sure what's going on now, but you should go and check. Lucian frowned at that. That's their business. It's not appropriate for me to go there. Aubrey went against her father because of you. Do you expect me to go there instead at this time of night? Besides, it sounded like he was being violent. I won't be able to stop him if I go there. You should go there at least for the sake of Aubrey's safety. She has just recovered, so she can't afford to get hurt again. Sonia chided.
Lucian was about to reject Sonia, but she cut the call before he could do so. For a moment, he stood there in silence with a scowl. Then, he kept his phone and headed downstairs. Although he was unwilling to obey his mother, he had no choice but to do so after hearing what she told him. Mr. Farwell? Catalina called out tentatively when she saw Lucian heading out at such a late hour. Lucian gave her a nod. I need to go somewhere for a while. Make sure to check on Essie from time to time. Catalina nodded and watched him leave the mansion. Half an hour later, Lucian appeared before the Pearson residence and pressed on the doorbell. He presumed he would have to wait for a while since the people inside were quarreling. To his surprise, the door was opened almost immediately. Lucian, what brings you here? Gina looked surprised and a bit uneasy to see Lucian. It's late already, so I won't ask you to come in. At that moment, the sound of glass shattering came from the house, followed by Samuel's roar. Since you're so stubborn, then get out of here. Don't stay in the Pearson residence. I don't know you. A troubled look flashed across Gina's face. She acted like she was about to close the door and said, I suppose you heard that. Samuel is arguing with Aubrey. You should hurry and leave. That was precisely the reason Lucian came. Naturally, he couldn't leave after hearing how severe the situation was. I know. My mom asked me to come and check on you all, he admitted. Please let me in. With that, he took a few steps forward, intending to enter the house. Gina hesitated for a moment. Finally, she stepped aside and let him in. As she watched Lucian climb the stairs, a sly look fleeted across her eyes. Leisurely, she followed him upstairs. The two of them came to a stop before the study. The door was wide open, and it was a mess inside. Books, pens, and pieces of a shattered vase littered the floor. Aubrey stood in the corner, her stubborn face wet with tears. Meanwhile, Samuel stood behind the study table and glared at her. How many times have I told you? Had you listened to me, you wouldn't have ended up like this. Lucian. Samuel. Gina hurriedly stepped out from behind Lucian. Stop talking. Lucian is here. Samuel's angry expression remained unchanged as he turned to the door. Upon meeting Lucian's gaze, he furrowed his brows and stayed quiet. Aubrey also looked up. She was surprised to see Lucian actually standing there, but she quickly got a hold of herself and turned her face to the side, wiping her tears miserably. Lucian, why did you come here at this time? Samuel cleared his throat and questioned gloomily. Glancing at Aubrey, Lucian scrunched his brows. Mr. Pearson, my mom told me that you and Aubrey are arguing, so I came over. What happened? Samuel glowered at Aubrey and rubbed his temples, explaining, it's nothing serious. It's just about your engagement. I noticed that there was no progress between you two after so many years, so I advised her to give up. Yet, she won't listen. Aubrey and Gina looked quite embarrassed about how easily Samuel brought up the topic. Lucian was also slightly surprised. Before, the Pearson family did almost everything they could to proceed with this marriage. What are they up to now? No. I waited for Lucian for 6 years. Why should I cancel our engagement? Aubrey protested with teary eyes, making sure to look at Lucian pitifully after speaking. Lucian frowned again when he met her eyes. If this were a typical day, he would surely make things clear with the Pearson family. However, he couldn't do so now since they got into such a big argument because of the matter. Meanwhile, Samuel's anger barely dissipated when he heard Aubrey's words. He slammed the table furiously and yelled, if you don't cancel it, get out of this house. Don't come back until you come back to your senses. Get out. Following that, Samuel strode out of the study with a steely face. As he passed by Lucian, he gave the latter a nod. With knitted brows, Lucian watched Samuel leave. In the study, Aubrey continued to sob. Gina looked at her husband and then at her daughter. Feeling lost about who she should persuade first, she turned to Lucian in the end. Lucian, I don't think Samuel will calm down anytime soon. Could you bring Aubrey to your place for a couple of days? As if worried that Lucian would not agree, she added carefully, I know you also have something to say about the engagement. After Samuel calms down, we'll have a talk. Don't worry. Aubrey will not make trouble. Aubrey remained silent, still sniffling. Never in Lucian's dreams did he expect to find himself in such a situation. Upon hearing Gina mention the engagement, he contemplated for a while and finally agreed. I got it. Afterward, he looked at Aubrey. Come with me. Aubrey and Gina were elated to see him give in so soon, but they forced themselves to remain calm. Not only that, Aubrey pretended to be hesitant as she stayed in her spot for some time. In the end, she slowly walked over to Lucian. Stay with Lucian for a few days for now. I'll talk to your dad. When he calms down, I'll go and fetch you. Gina appeared to be very concerned about her daughter. Her eyes even reddened while she spoke. In response, Aubrey nodded tearfully. After giving Gina a nod, Lucian led Aubrey out of the Pearson residence. Gina walked them out and watched the two leave in Lucian's car. When the car disappeared from Gina's sight, the bitter look on her face was replaced with a smug smile. Samuel came downstairs just then, his countenance void of anger. Have they left? He asked, cautiously peeking outside. Gina nodded gleefully. Their plan was to have Samuel kick Aubrey out of the house during their fake argument. Then, they would ask Sonia for help and prompt the latter to send Lucian over. With Aubrey being thrown out of the house, Lucian, no matter how unwilling he was, would have to take her in. She was no stranger, after all. To their surprise, the plan went smoothly. Now, it was all up to Aubrey. They could only hope that she would grab this chance to earn a spot in Lucian's heart and officially move into his house. That way, she would truly become his wife. As Samuel and Gina pictured the day their plan would succeed, anticipation was written all over their faces. On the other end, Lucian and Aubrey left the Pearson residence together. As Aubrey sat in the passenger seat, she did not stop putting on an elaborate show of sobbing and wiping her tears away in hopes of getting Lucian's attention. While Lucian did notice the weeping woman next to him, he had no intention of saying anything. After all, he already knew the reason why Aubrey fought with Samuel. If he were to say anything more, he was worried about making Aubrey cry harder. It wasn't long before Aubrey noticed that all her weeping and sobbing had no effect on Lucian, who did not even have any kind words to offer to her. She gradually calmed down and stopped sobbing, turning away to look out the window in disappointment. Upon noticing the scenery outside, Aubrey's expression changed abruptly. Her voice still thick from crying, she turned around and asked, "Hey Lucian, it's already so late. Aren't we going back home?" Lucian merely sat there impassively as he replied, "I've booked you a room for 2 nights." He was implying that he had no intention of bringing her back to the Farwell residence at all. Having heard this, Aubrey suddenly felt as though a bucket of cold water had been dumped over her. Determined to stand up for herself, she queried, "Will I be staying there alone?" Lucian merely raised a brow and grunted in response. According to Gina, Aubrey only needed to stay away for a brief period of time. Him arranging a hotel stay for her was effectively a nod to the Pearson family's kindness to him in days past. At his affirmation, Aubrey's expression froze. She was unable to say anything for a while. When she left the Pearson residence earlier, she and her parents had thought that things were going according to plan. Alas, she had made an error. While Lucian had agreed to take her away, he never promised to bring her to the Farwell residence. She did not expect him to have booked a hotel room for her, though. What on earth is this? Am I somehow unable to book a hotel room for myself if I wanted? The very thought made anger burn deep in Aubrey's heart, but she could not let it show. All she could do was suppress her temper to the best of her ability and sit in silence. Very soon, Lucian's car pulled into the driveway of a 5-star hotel. Lucian opened the door first and stepped out. To his surprise, however, Aubrey remained seated in the car. He could not tell what she was thinking. "We've arrived," came Lucian's deep voice. This shook Aubrey out of her reverie. After forcing a grateful smile at him, she turned around and exited the vehicle. The moment Aubrey's back was to him, her expression became gloomy. One after the other, they entered the hotel. Lucian had booked her a 3-day stay in the presidential suite. After confirming their arrival, he gave her the keycard and spun around to leave. Unexpectedly, Aubrey started to sniffle again. Arching a brow, Lucian impatiently turned around to look at the woman behind him before asking, "Is there anything else?" Aubrey looked up at him timidly and hesitated to speak. A while later, she mumbled, "I don't really like sleeping in hotels. It's also really late, and I'm scared of being alone." With pleading eyes, she continued, "Can you escort me upstairs?" Hearing this, Lucian gave her the once-over warily but could not discern anything out of the ordinary. He also reckoned that since she had just fought with Samuel, it was not unusual for her to be in low spirits. As such, he said, "Let's go." Seeing that he agreed, Aubrey flashed him a smile with some difficulty. Timidly, she put her head down again and tailed after him from behind. Out of his sight, a sly look flashed past Aubrey's eyes. The two then walked in single file toward the elevator. Throughout the ride up, Aubrey did not utter a single syllable. Lucian had been busy the whole day. Given how tired he was frowning and starting to let his mind go blank.
As the elevator approached the top floor, the doors slowly opened. Lucian immediately returned to his senses. Upon stepping out of the elevator, the sight of the dimly lit corridor made him frown a little. Aubrey quietly followed him from behind. When they arrived at the doorway, Lucian inserted the keycard and opened the door for her. He stopped and looked at her indifferently, waiting for her to enter the room herself. Aubrey paused, turning to look at the person beside her. She was silently asking why he was not going inside. "You'll have to make do with this for the next few days. I'll try to talk things through with Mr. Pearson. Maybe I can make him calm down and see reason," said Lucian coldly. He had deliberately turned a blind eye to her questioning expression. Having heard this, Aubrey became visibly crestfallen. "Lucian, have you really not figured out why I argued with my dad? Is that all you have to say to me?" Lucian's expression remained as mild as it was before. "You're not going to want to hear what I have to say right now. I suggest getting some rest and not overthinking things." After saying this, Lucian turned around and left. Aubrey already looked slightly unhinged. "I'm not sure what she's going to do if I stay on." Lucian did not want to cause any more of a scene than necessary, only because of the kindness the persons had once shown him and the fact Aubrey had just been kicked out of the house. However, he barely managed to walk 2 steps when he felt someone grab his clothes from behind. Lucian could feel his heart sink. Maintaining the same impassive attitude, he turned around and said, "Let go." "I won't let go." "Lucian, I'm scared." "Won't you stay and keep me company?" Aubrey's face was a mix of pleading and determination as she continued, "At the end of the day, we're still engaged. Nobody is going to bat an eyelid if you stay." "What nonsense are you blabbering now?" hissed Lucian angrily. "Aubrey, let me go while I still have a measure of calm. I'm warning you." Aubrey could not care less anymore. In the face of Lucian's rage, she still refused to back down. Instead, she became emboldened and tugged at the hem of his clothes to close the gap between them. With her eyes shut, she leaned in to kiss him. The disgust that Lucian felt at this moment was practically tangible. Just as she was about to meet his lips, he shoved Aubrey away. With her eyes still shut, Aubrey was caught off guard as she was abruptly pushed away. She staggered back a few steps before falling to the ground in a daze. "Have you lost your mind?" The chill in Lucian's voice was quite terrifying to hear. Aubrey merely sat on the ground, taking a while to return to her senses. With bloodshot eyes, she looked at him and said, "I love you, Lucian. I was kicked out of the house because of you, but you brought me to a hotel? Have you ever considered my feelings?" Unmoved, Lucian glanced at her. "You'd better not have any thoughts you shouldn't have. Did you think we'd still have a future after what you did to Essie? You should know better." Her voice was shaky when she replied, "I've already apologized about Estella Dash." Lucian cut her short impatiently. "I'll pretend that this never happened today. However, I do hope that nothing like this ever happens again in the future." Without giving Aubrey the chance to respond, Lucian left swiftly. Lucian's indifferent and cold attitude had tears filling Aubrey's eyes as the desperation in her heart soared to new heights. She had thought that Lucian was going to take her back to the Farwell residence and that they could become even more intimate. However, Lucian had brought her to a hotel instead and said very plainly what he thought. They no longer had a future together. Thinking of this, Aubrey found it hard to breathe.
Aubrey watched as the elevator slowly descended to the ground floor. The moment it came to a stop, Aubrey dusted herself off and went back to her room. She was not aware of how long she had been sitting in a daze when her phone suddenly rang, breaking her out of reverie. Aubrey immediately returned to her senses as she glanced at the caller ID. It was her mother calling, and it did not take long for her to figure out what the call was for. The phone continued to ring, but Aubrey had no intention of picking up. All she could do was watch helplessly as the screen kept flashing before everything went quiet. Shortly after, the phone rang again. This continued for a while before Aubrey finally picked up out of annoyance. "Aubrey, why didn't you answer the phone? What's happened?" Are you not at his place yet? As soon as Aubrey picked up, Gina's concerned voice filled her ear. Mockery flashed on Aubrey's face after she heard this. Even now, her mother still thought that she was going to the Farwell residence. When Aubrey remained silent, Gina asked, Aubrey, are you there? Why aren't you saying anything? I'm at a hotel, said Aubrey, her face devoid of expression. As soon as she said this, nothing but a heavy silence hung about the air. Aubrey continued, Lucian isn't here anymore. He booked me a presidential suite, asked me to get some rest, and then left on his own. Gina was shocked that Lucian did not bring her daughter back to the Farwell residence. She then noticed how crestfallen Aubrey sounded and tried to comfort her. Don't worry. The fact that he was willing to take you away is enough. After all, he booked the room, didn't he? I think he'll visit you often. Aubrey let out a peal of harsh, sarcastic laughter. Believe me, he won't. He said. There's no way we'll ever be together. I bet he has gone to see that Jarvis batch right now. As she thought of Roxanne, Aubrey's expression darkened even more. It's that batch's fault. If she hadn't returned, then I would be Mrs. Farwell by now. Gina never thought that her carefully laid plans would backfire so gloriously. When she heard what Aubrey said, her face fell. You don't worry. While Gina had every intention of comforting her daughter, she could not think of the words to say. If Lucian had truly said these things, he definitely meant business. What good were her words then? Even if Lucian said all that, you still have Sonia. I'm sure she'll help you, said Gina hastily after a while. At the mention of Sonia, Aubrey's heart was suddenly filled with hope. Although Mrs. Farwell has no control over Lucian's thoughts, she has always seen me in a good light. She even went out of her way to drive that horrid woman Roxanne away. Right now, it's crucial that I obtain Mrs. Farwell's favor to help myself out of this rut. Being able to drive away that batch Roxanne is the best possible scenario and the icing on the cake if it can be managed. When that happens, even if Lucian and Roxanne like each other, Lucian would have no other choice. Thinking of this, Aubrey turned sullen, and her tone suddenly became icy. You're right. No matter what, Lucian can only marry me. That batch Roxanne has caused too much damage. I will have my revenge. Gina nodded hastily. Don't worry, Aubrey. I'll help you. You've waited for Lucian for so long. Who is he going to marry if not you? The pair spoke about this issue at length. Seeing that it was truly getting late, Gina persuaded Aubrey to get some rest. After hanging up, Gina was filled with guilt and regret. If I'd known sooner that he was going to put her in a hotel, I wouldn't have put her up to this in the first place. Meanwhile, Roxanne did not have the slightest clue about what Aubrey and her mother were planning. The whole day had been spent playing with the children and dealing with Lucian. Hence, Roxanne fell asleep the moment she lay down. However, she was awakened by the phone ringing the next day. In a daze, Roxanne opened her eyes and picked up the phone without looking at who the caller was. Miss Jarvis, are you awake? I've got something that needs your attention. She barely had time to take a breather when Jack's voice broke the silence. Upon realizing that it was Jack, Roxanne suddenly became alert. Curiously, she asked, has something happened? Roxanne rarely had personal dealings with Jack, so she knew that he was likely calling her for a business or medical issue. Regardless, both matters were not to be taken lightly. On that note, Jack broke the silence first. Do you remember Jamie? That kid from the medical consultation the last time? Roxanne's expression immediately turned grave. I do. What happened? During the consultation, Daniel had spooked the child, resulting in heart palpitations that caused him to lose consciousness. It was only through Roxanne's intervention that Jamie regained consciousness. Thus, Roxanne had quite a deep impression of the child. The orphanage contacted me just now. They aren't sure what happened, but Jamie contracted a high fever and has been hospitalized. I figured that since you handled his consultation the last time, you'd be more familiar with the situation. If you have time, can you go and take a look? Asked Jack politely. Upon hearing that the child was sick, Roxanne immediately agreed. Of course. Which hospital is it? I'll make my way there right now. I'd like to go with you too. I happen to be nearby, so I can pick you up along the way after you get ready. Roxanne hesitated for a brief moment to ponder over the time, but eventually agreed. After hanging up, Roxanne wasted no time taking a shower. She hurriedly put on a change of clothes and went downstairs. Archie and Benny were awakened by the sound of Roxanne closing the door. They jolted out of bed to see that their mother was the one rushing downstairs, seemingly in a hurry. The children ran after her, asking, Mommy? Where are you going? It was only then Roxanne remembered that Archie and Benny were there. She turned around to pat them on the head, replying, A little boy from the orphanage has fallen ill, so I need to take a look. As for school, I don't think I have the time to drop you off at kindergarten today. I'll help you two ask permission for a day off. Hearing that it was a little boy who had fallen sick, the boys were immediately filled with worry. Without further hesitation, they nodded and said, You must do your best to treat him. Roxanne nodded, smiling at them. Just as she was about to bid the children goodbye, a loud honk was heard outside the door. I think that must be Jack. Roxanne straightened herself and left, the boys following her to the doorstep. At the driveway of the mansion, Jack got down from the car and was prepared to knock when he saw Roxanne and the children coming out. Jack was a little surprised to see the two boys trailing after Roxanne. He knew that she had children but had never laid eyes on them before. The children looked as if they had just gotten out of bed and were still somewhat muddled. Yet, they were well behaved. They obediently followed Roxanne from behind and gave Jack polite, albeit confused, little waves. Hello there. Seeing how polite and cute the children were, Jack gentled his tone. The two children straightened themselves and looked curiously at Jack, unsure of who he was. With a smile, Roxanne said, This is Mr. Damaris, a colleague of mine. The introduction seemed to put the boys at ease as they sweetly greeted Jack with another hello. Jack reached out to pat the boys on their heads. I'm in a rush and never thought I'd run into you both today. I should have brought you some gifts. There's always next time, I suppose. I'll get you both something nice. The children nodded obediently and chimed, Thank you, Mr. Damaris. Jack smiled at the boys before looking at Roxanne, signaling that they had to leave. Roxanne acquiesced and turned to the boys again. I'll be off now. Why don't you both go back inside? Having said that, Roxanne and Jack got into the car. Archie and Benny waited until Jack's car completely disappeared from their line of sight before shuffling back into the mansion. Archie, I think that Mr. Damaris looks quite handsome, said Benny while rubbing his eyes. He had suddenly become more alert. Hearing his brother say so, Archie raised a brow as he recalled the man from earlier. He is handsome and has a style similar to Daddy's, but he's also more gentle than Daddy. Moreover, if I understood Mommy correctly, he's the man from the Damaris family who she was yearning for. He must be quite capable. Benny then murmured, Is that man pursuing Mommy too? If that's the case, it'll be even harder for Daddy to pursue her. Roxanne already held a grudge against Lucian. If there was another competitor for her heart, Benny and Archie could only worry for their father. Archie could not help but ask, If that's true, then it only proves that Mommy is a good person. That's why so many people like her. But what about Daddy? Asked Benny, furrowing his brows out of concern. I prefer Daddy. Should we remind him? Although Lucian was taking his time to win Roxanne over, she still did not trust him. The children could see that their father was putting in a lot of effort, and coupled with the existence of Estella, the boys were definitely biased toward Lucian. Archie and Benny looked at each other, their expressions conflicted. Did they need to warn their father? What if they did not and Jack stole their mother away? But how were they going to do it, if this was the plan. This conundrum proved to be too much for the two gifted children. For the first time, Archie and Benny finally got a taste of why people experienced a headache when trying to solve problems. A sullen-looking Archie then remarked, If Daddy wants to pursue Mommy, then he will definitely notice that someone else wants to steal her away. This is a grown-up problem. If we talk to Daddy about it, he might feel embarrassed. I think it's best that we say nothing. Benny nodded solemnly. That's right. Daddy's great, and he'll definitely win Mommy over. For all we know, he might have figured this out much sooner than we did. Archie and Benny could not tell if they were guessing or actually trying to convince themselves with all this chatter. In the end, they both arrived at the conclusion that no matter how many people tried to pursue their mother, the person to emerge victorious would definitely be Lucien. Although they both used to have prejudices against Lucien, they became convinced of his sincerity toward Roxanne after bonding with him for some time. With sincerity, looks, and capability all in one package, they refused to believe that Roxanne would not choose Lucien. Archie and Benny were fairly independent boys, having gotten used to Roxanne's long work hours. After a short discussion about Jack and Lucien, the boys quickly washed up and warmed some milk and bread for breakfast. The doorbell suddenly rang just as they finished eating. Archie and Benny exchanged a wary glance. When they switched on the video intercom, they saw Estella waving sweetly at the camera. The boys instantly smiled and opened the door for their precious Essie. Outside, Lucien stood beside Estella and held her hand. Benny could not help but feel sheepish when he spotted the subject of his discussion. To his credit, Archie remained calm and greeted Lucien politely. A good morning, Mr. Farwell and Essie. A good morning, Archie and Benny. Estella was thrilled to meet the boys early in the morning, and she had a radiant smile to show for it. After greeting the boys, she looked into the house expectantly, hoping to see Roxanne. Alas, Roxanne was nowhere to be seen. Estella tugged on her father's hand in agitation, and Lucien immediately understood her anxiety. He looked over the boys' heads and surveyed the house, only to confirm Roxanne's absence. Lucien frowned in confusion and asked, Where's your mom? Roxanne should have been ready to send the boys to school at this hour, yet she was conspicuously absent. His question caused Archie and Benny to cast furtive glances at each other. They simultaneously recalled what they had discussed earlier and hesitated about telling their father that a handsome man had fetched Roxanne to work. Lucien sensed their hesitation, and his heart sank. What's wrong? Is she feeling unwell? He assumed Roxanne had caught a chill last night and was resting in bed. After he spoke, he led Estella into the house, planning to head upstairs and check on Roxanne. Realizing he was mistaken about the situation, the boys piped up, No. Mommy, went out. Lucien paused in his tracks and turned toward the boys with a frown. Why did she go out without you? Isn't she sending you to school? Archie and Benny paused and mulled over their reply. Eventually, Benny stated, A man brought Mommy away. He immediately averted his gaze from Lucien guiltily after that. Lucien's frown deepened after he heard Benny's explanation. Larry and Jack's faces immediately surfaced in his mind. They are the only people who could bring Roxanne away. Reminded of Roxanne's relationship with the two men, Lucien's expression darkened. His tone inadvertently grew stern as he asked, Which man? Do you know him? It sounded like a reenactment of how he told off Estella a day before. Benny jumped in surprise and was about to confess everything when Archie poked him in the ribs. He quickly recovered himself and placed both hands behind his back. Then, he frowned as though trying hard to recall his memories and mumbled, I don't think so. His answer was hardly useful to Lucien. Lucien furrowed his brows in thought and rephrased his question. Well, do you know why he came to get your mom? Mommy said a child was sick and needed her help. Archie volunteered before his brother slipped up.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.